Bienvenidos. Welcome, Ruben.
Buenos días, everybody. I don't know if it falls on me to wake everybody up. Last night when I was in my room, I could hear voices and laughter and music up till 2, 3 in the morning. So I don't know how many of you really are awake or you're being propped up by friends, etc. It's really good to be here with you. And I want to thank the Annunciation Solidarity Network for the invitation to be here with you this morning. I want to thank Chris Kerr and the ISN team for all of the work that they've invested in bringing this together. It's an annual effort, and it takes, I'm sure, an immense amount of time and energy to bring it together. And so I'm very grateful to you for the invitation to be with you this weekend. And then, of course, I want to thank you, those of you that also have to raise funds and find the way to make your way, to attend, to be part of this moment where it's possible to exchange, meet other people, and overall be able to exchange the energy that each one of you brings, each group, each school brings to this. And so I'm very grateful to you. And it's very impressive to see how many of you are here today. I also want to thank the Annunciation Solidarity Network for extending to us the ability to have an information table on behalf of Annunciation House, and grateful to Ellie Boyd, who is a member of the board of directors of Annunciation House, who was a former volunteer with Annunciation House, who is helping to staff it for those of you that may be interested afterwards to stop by the table and talk with her about the work of Annunciation House or more information. Steadfast hope in precarious times. I come from the border. I come from Annunciation House, an NGO that for more than 46 years has been welcoming and offering hospitality to the arriving refugees. I come from the border where this gathering's theme, steadfast hope in precarious times, in fact, is a living reality on the border. They're not just words. That theme actually is alive on the border. The precarious times, as well as the steadfast hope. When I think of the precarious times, nothing captures that better than this series of examples of what I mean by the precarious times. Recently, we received a family who crossed the Rio Grande, and as they were crossing the Rio Grande, they encountered the National Guard. This is part of Governor Abbott's, what he refers to as the Lone Star program. It is a very well-funded effort to try and keep people from crossing the border. And so part of that involves using the National Guard. And so when people cross the border, they encounter the National Guard, and sometimes the National Guard can be very, very assertive. This family was telling us that as they crossed, they found themselves with National Guard officers, soldiers, who had their rifles, and that those rifles were pointed at them. They were literally, one mom says, I had a rifle pointed to my head. Her little boy was so terrified that he started peeing his pants as they were being processed. I asked myself, what does that say about us. When I think of the precarious times, I think of the woman from Venezuela that when she crossed the border, and because of the concertina wire that has been rolled out in many sections of the border, and I don't know if you're familiar with the concertina wire, there are edges to it that are razor sharp. And so it's put out there to try and intimidate people from even attempting to cross. But when you are fleeing for your life, you're going to cross it. And so when she arrived to us, her hands and her feet were all cut up. In fact, she had to be from the border. She was so cut up that she was transported to a hospital, and it was after the hospital discharged her that she came to us. I have photos on my phone of her feet, of her hands, and the cuts that resulted from having to navigate and then get caught in that concertina wire. We've had families who share with us the experience of being shot at with pepper projectiles. These are like pepper bullets that are used. They hurt you, and they're meant to intimidate you from wanting to cross over. I've heard from many of the people from Venezuela, from Ecuador, from Colombia, who the only way that you can cross from South America into Central America on the journey here is to cross the Darien Gap. It is approximately a 70-mile section of jungle, very dangerous jungle. Just the jungle part of it, because of the animals, the snakes, the propensity to severe rain and flooding that results, the number of people who die crossing the Darien Gap that is now inhabited by a lot of gangs who are extorting and getting money out of the refugees, and having a dad, a mom, say to me that as we were crossing the Darien Gap, we would cover the eyes of our children so that they would not see the corroding bodies on the journey. When we talk about the precarious moment, we can't help but also talk about the rhetoric that is now part of the normal conversation in this country about immigration, murderers, rapists, to hear that the United States has become the garbage can of the world, implying that all of these refugees, all of these immigrants are garbage. The use of that kind of rhetoric, the relentless use of that kind of rhetoric, to repeat it over and over and over, to reach the point where we so desensitize people that it becomes acceptable to think of human beings as the equivalent of garbage that are filling up our garbage cans. In El Paso, 5 years ago, this past August, a young man who is not much older than many of you here, and probably is as old as some of you are here, got in his car in Dallas, Texas, and drove all the way to El Paso. When he arrived in El Paso that morning, he was feeling hungry, and so he got off the freeway at a Walmart because he wanted to buy something to eat. And when he got off the freeway and parked his car and got out of his car and started walking into the Walmart, he looked and he said, "There's a lot of Mexicans here. This is as good a place as any." He returned to his car and took out his assault rifle and begun to shoot. And that morning at that Walmart, he killed 23 individuals, human beings, across the age gamut and wounded a like number of individuals because he had come to El Paso to help stop the invasion. We remember a year ago this past March when in Juarez, Mexico, at night, our sister city, the Annunciation House sister city, that has an immigration detention facility literally right across the border. If you go over into Juarez, you can just walk, it's right there, right there. And in that facility, there were close to 80 men in the male section of this facility, and they had another section where they housed the women. 2-3 of the refugees in that facility started their sleeping mats on fire, and that fire quickly spread, and the keys to open the doors to let them out, to get out from the fire, were not made available. There's an actual video where you see the security forces managing that facility, and they will not open the door to let the people out, and the smoke ended up killing 40 refugee men and ended up wounding and leaving severely damaged a like number of refugees. We remember well Operation Zero Tolerance, that policy whereby the children of families were taken away. And the reason this was done was that when someone crosses the border illegally, you can work with them, you can process them administratively, which is what historically we have done. Over the years, we've processed people administratively, but you can also process people criminally. The decision was made, we want to start processing people criminally, and for this reason. Because if you cross over with your 3 children and I decide to prosecute you criminally, I have to put you in a jail, and I have to hold you in that jail until I can schedule you on the calendar of a federal magistrate. In a jail, you can't go into that jail with your children. So I'm going to take your children away from you, and I'm going to turn those children over to the Office of Refugee Resettlement so that I can keep you in jail. And we did that to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of children. Annunciation House, when a judge in San Diego finally ruled that that operation was unconstitutional and ordered immigration to reunite the children with their parents, Annunciation House was one of the key places where, after families had been reunited, the families were then brought to us, and they had been released, and we then provided them with hospitality as we assisted them to be able to move on and reunite with family members in the United States. And I remember to this day, I will never, ever, ever forget listening when one afternoon I got a call and I was told by immigration, Ruben, you've got 6 families that have just been reunited and they're coming to you. They arrived at about 4 in the afternoon at one of our hospitality sites. I happened to be there. They arrived, the volunteers welcomed them. They explained how the house worked. They were told, you're free. You're no longer in the custody. We have nothing to do with immigration. We work with the church. We're going to have dinner. We'll show you where you're going to sleep and give them their hygiene pouch, etc. After dinner, The 6 of them are sitting around some couches, and they begin to talk among themselves. And I'm listening. And they talk about the moment the children were taken away. And one father says, it was this big room, and there were officers, and I was there with my 14-year-old son, and an officer came to me and said to me, your son needs to go to the other room. He didn't tell me why. He didn't explain why, but we knew. My son immediately started to cry and saying to me, I don't want to go. I don't want to be separated from you. Don't make me go. Please, Dad, don't make me go. All in Spanish. And the father saying, what could I do? I said to him, mijo, váyase. Vamos a estar bien. Nos van a reunir. Go. We're going to be okay. We'll get back together again. And so they took my son crying into another room, and they asked me to go and stand by the wall with other parents who had already been separated. And I was standing there watching other children being separated. It says there were children, there were 5 and 6 years old, that grabbed hold of their mother's legs, screaming as officers came and grabbed them by their shirt and yanked them away, and then slid them across the floor where another officer picked them up. These are precarious times. That is where I come from. That is the border. And I come to say to you, the theme for this weekend is living. It is a living theme. It has feet, it has arms, it has gender, it has age. Precarious times is not a theory. It's not pages in a book we study. It is the day in, day out reality of this constant flow of refugees, of individuals who are fleeing for one of 2 reasons. I am fleeing, and you know what? I speak to a lot of groups. Everybody knows the answers. Everybody knows the answer of why people flee. I'm afraid, or I can't feed my family. Those were the reasons that the first refugees that arrived at Annunciation House in 1978, those were the reasons they gave us for leaving their country. And 46 years later, in 2024, they continue to be the reasons why people leave their country. And as we acknowledge the precarious times that we live in, the border is also alive with a steadfast hope. And that steadfast hope we see in the people themselves. A good number of years ago, we had this church, a local church, that wanted to come and serve dinner on New Year's Day. And we said, yes, you can come. And it was a prayer group. It was a Catholic prayer group from a local parish. They wanted to come and serve dinner. And so we said, yes, they came. The strange thing about it is that they showed up like at 11 o'clock in the morning. And I said, you know, you're really early. We don't have dinner till 6 o'clock. And I said, well, we thought we would get here early so that we could have a time to have a little prayer gathering. And so they were trying to gather the refugees that were staying there at Annunciation House so that they could go up. We have a chapel there. They could go and and have this prayer gathering. The people that were there, they wanted to go play soccer. And so they're kind of looking at me and saying, what do we do? And I said, go play soccer. And I said to the prayer group leaders, I said, listen, I'm sorry. The plan was that they were going to get to go play soccer, so they're going to play soccer. Well, so primarily all the guys go play soccer, and the people that stay behind are a lot of the moms with their kids, et cetera, and some of the older guys that no longer play soccer. And so they rounded them up and they said, let's go up to the church, to the chapel, and we'll pray. I said to myself, I want to be part of this. And I go up into our chapel and I sit at the back because I want to watch. And like most, and I don't know if any of you have been to a charismatic prayer gathering, they start with a charismatic prayer that people are praying, and some people start praying in tongues and all that, and it was beautiful and it was wonderful, but it was primarily the members of the prayer group. The refugees that were there were kind of looking, asking themselves what's going to happen. And so then some of the members of the prayer group got up and said, would anybody here like to say anything or what have you? And people just sat there, they were quiet. And so there was some more praying and a little bit of singing. And again, does anybody? And finally, this man, this indigenous man from Guatemala, short, about 40 years of age, he gets up and he says, I want to share with you. And he goes up to the front and he says, I'm from Guatemala. I work the land. I'm in agriculture. I'm a member of an evangelical church in Guatemala. I don't know why. But for the longest time, I have sensed this calling within me to go north and take the gospel to the people in the north. And I used to say to myself, and I would talk to my wife, and I would say, sometimes I feel like I'm crazy because this voice keeps calling me. It keeps calling me. And he talked to his pastor, and he spoke with his wife, and he spoke with his wife's parents. And this went on literally for a couple of years. And finally, his wife, his pastor, his family said, maybe you need to hear and follow the call. And so they took up whatever collection of money, a little bit of money, and he got his Bible, and he started walking. He started walking out of Guatemala, and it took him 6-8 months to cross Mexico, walking and hitching rides, till he finally got to the border in Juarez, Mexico. And there in Juarez, Mexico, he crossed the border. Someone said to him, they'll give you shelter at Annunciation House. He came to Annunciation House. And so here he is, sharing this with the members of the prayer group, and he's saying to them, God has asked me to come to the United States to bring you the good news of the gospel. I was in the back, and it took everything within me not to stand up and begin to cheer for him, because they had come so convinced that they were going to bring Jesus to the refugees, and they were confronted with the steadfastness of the hope of a man that had placed his entire life at the disposal of God to come and to talk to us about the living gospel in the poorest part of Guatemala, where he and his family lived, with the humility of that man. And I was just blown away. That experience will never leave me. When I think about steadfastness and the hope that is part of that steadfastness, I have found myself, I would say, during the past year and a half, thinking about the women at the foot of the cross when Jesus was crucified. You know, all four Gospels talk about, they mention, they include in different forms reference to the women at the foot of the cross. Some of them actually name some of the women. Not all of them, and some of them name different, but they are all women. Interestingly, the women at the foot of the cross talk about steadfastness, talk about what it must have taken at a time when people were terrified to be identified with Jesus for fear that the crowd would also turn on you as they had turned on Jesus, but they were there. Interestingly, the Gospels really don't talk about the men at the foot of the cross. I tease with people and I say to them, I always wanted to know why Jesus chose 12 men to be disciples and no women. And I finally understood. The reason he chose 12 men was because Jesus was really concerned that there weren't going to be any men in heaven. So he better choose 12 disciples to make sure that at least there's 12 men. The women got it. The women got it. You know, the women got it. What has brought and what has kept that image of the women at the foot of the cross is that within a very short period of time in one of our houses, we received 4 different guests with 4 very different situations that impacted me profoundly. And all I could think about was the women at the foot of the cross. The first was one of the victims of the fire in that immigration camp in Juarez, who came to us, who actually, his heart stopped multiple times and they had to revive him in Juarez. He went to a hospital in Juarez where he was intubated. He was then transported to El Paso. He went to a hospital in El Paso. He had an anoxic brain injury that had the equivalent of a severe stroke, where he was left unable to walk. He was left unable to feed himself. His hands, like stroke victims, they began to atrophy. The hospital called me and said, Ruben, we have this 21-year-old, he was from Guatemala, he is from Guatemala. We have this 21-year-old, he really doesn't need to be in a hospital, he needs to be in a rehab center because he's severely disabled. Will you receive him? I went to the hospital to meet him, and there he was on the bed, and he couldn't do anything for himself. I went back and I spoke to the volunteers at the house, and I said, are you willing to receive him? And they said, let's receive him. And we brought him to the house. He couldn't bathe himself. He couldn't go to the bathroom by himself. He couldn't dress himself. He couldn't feed himself. And that's where it started. He's now been with us since June of 2023. So it's going on a year and a half that he's been with us, and we've cared for him, and we were able to get him into therapy, physical therapy, and occupational therapy. Right after that, we got a call from the Mexican consulate. We have a 15-year-old at Children's Hospital who's dying. The hospital has called us and asked us if we would help get his parents here so that he doesn't die by himself. The family is from Michoacan. The Mexican consulate called me and said, Ruben, I know you'll give the parents hospitality. We just don't have the funding. The consulate doesn't have the funding to pay for people's transportation. And I said to them, I'll work that out. You just reserve the tickets. I'll work out the funding. And we flew the parents. They arrived on a Sunday afternoon. The Mexican consulate met them at the airport in Juarez, drove them to the port of entry, and there they were issued a humanitarian visa. They finally crossed to El Paso and went straight to the hospital. I got a text from the Mexican consulate at 3 o'clock in the morning letting me know that the boy had died. But the parents had been there with him since 7 o'clock that previous evening. After the boy died, the parents then came to stay with us at the hospitality house, Casa Papa Francisco, while arrangements started to get made to transport the boy's body back to Mexico, Michoacan. I asked the parents, why was your son here? His name was Nicolás. ¿Qué estaba haciendo Nicolás aquí? What was Nicolás doing here? Why did he come up? And his parents said, he is the oldest of our 6 children, and we can't feed our kids. And we sent him to see if he could find a job to send money home to help us feed the rest. Woo! It's just hard. When Nicolás's mom comes to me to thank me for bringing her up here because she got to caress his hair before he died. Talk about steadfastness. We got a call from University Medical Center, and they wanted to know if we would be willing to receive a woman from Guatemala, 32 years old, who had her leg amputated. And we brought her. And when she arrived, her amputation was above the knee. She had been crossed over by smugglers who then turned on her, beat her savagely, raped her, and then left her body, her naked body, in an alley where someone walking through the alley, finds this naked body and calls police, and the police come, and they actually did not think that she was going to live. The injury on the leg got infected, and they could not stop the infection, and that's what led to the amputation above the knee. She came to us, and when she arrived with us, the brokenness of this woman, the brokenness, it wasn't just the leg, it was the brokenness of her spirit when she comes to us. The reason I think about the women at the foot of the cross is because they were totally powerless. They couldn't do anything for Jesus. He was on the cross. They couldn't take him down. They couldn't save him. They couldn't minister. But they were there. But they were there. They were there, and they were witnesses. And we're going to stand here at the foot. And we can't do anything for you, but we're going to be there. That's steadfastness. When we have to acknowledge, you're going to go do an action day tomorrow, and you're going to encounter elected officials who are going to be courteous with you, but whose minds are already closed to wanting to hear your advocacy for the issues of immigration, of climate change, that you're going to bring them. And you're going to get that feeling of the women at the foot of the cross. You have to be filled with that spirit of steadfastness. They may have ignored us. We may not have gotten to first place, but by God, we were there. We are there. And we're going to continue to stand at the foot of the cross. You know, one of the reasons I wanted to come and be with you this morning is because of your youth. because of where you are in your lives as you're looking forward to what it is you're being called to. This is your time. This is your time where you're going to have to make some choices. None of us get to select the moment in history into which we enter the world. None of us. But all of us get to decide how we respond. This is your time. This is your time. That before you go to sleep at night and you're lying in bed, you ask yourself, what do you want from me, God? Are you asking me to take my Bible and cross countries like that Guatemalan man to bring the good news of your presence in our world, your love for the world, for everyone, for every single individual? What is it that you want from me? And those are the discussions that you have with yourself in those moments. This is your time. You know, in 1960, I was a little younger than most of you here, but I was sitting in front of a television set with my family as we watched the first Catholic president take the oath of office and deliver his speech, his inaugural speech. And there within that speech, Kennedy gave those famous, famous lines. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. This is your time, and what it means that you're the ones that are being called to be steadfast. You have to discover how that steadfastness, it's no longer a time for people to take you by the hand and lead you and navigate for you. It is now your turn to take others by the hand, that you are the ones that must be that steadfast hope. Not only tomorrow when you go to Capitol Hill, but when you return to your community of other Jesuit high schools and universities, to instill in them the realization this is no longer a question of criticizing what other generations before us haven't done or the errors that they've committed, because this is your time. It's our time. We're the ones that must now be steadfast. From that inaugural moment, the Peace Corps was born under that administration, where Kennedy appealed to young adults from across the country, and they received training, and then he sent them out all over the world to be impacted by the poor of the world, and they were changed. To this day, there are associations of Peace Corps members who were profoundly affected by going out there and being evangelized by the poor of the world. And they came back and they started to work on changing the things that needed to be changed in our own country. This is your time. And if we listen and take from another Jesuit who happens to be now the leader of the Catholic Church in the world, Pope Francis, a Jesuit, who on a visit to Argentina, speaking to some of the pastors, some of the priests, and he said to them that more than by fear of going astray, my hope is that we will be moved by the fear of remaining shut up within structures which give us a false sense of security, within rules which make us harsh, judgely other people, within habits which make us feel safe, while at our doors people are starving, and Jesus does not tire of saying to us, give them something to eat. And then knowing that there were very many young people there at that church in Rio, he specifically said to the young people, I want the church to go out into the streets. I prefer a church which is bruised, hurting, and dirty because it has been out on the street. This is your time to go out into the street. The Pope is saying to you that it's okay. He wants you, the youth, he wants you to come back at the end of the day bruised, hurting, and dirty, precisely because you've been out on the street. You've been out there understanding it is your time to be steadfast in hope. That's what you're being called to do. I am the product of a Jesuit 4-year high school. I am the product of a Jesuit 4-year university. I am the product of a Jesuit university where I did some graduate studies. I am profoundly grateful for the opportunity to be able to study, to be able to prepare with a Jesuit, to get ready to go out into the street. And how privileged I have been to have lived my life on the street, being bruised, getting dirty, for the privilege of being able to welcome the refugees. And right now, Annunciation House finds itself in a battle with the Attorney General of the state of Texas, who wants to close down Annunciation House. He wants to close us down because we've taken in undocumented people. When the hospitals call us and want to release the patients who haven't been processed, who fell off the wall and they haven't been processed, they're undocumented, and we take them in. And the Attorney General says, we want to shut Annunciation House because they're smuggling, they're trafficking, and they're operating stash houses. The truth is, we're operating holy houses, and they're holy not because of us, the volunteers. They are holy because of the refugees who come into our doors and they grace, and in them we see the face of God. Your prayer this morning quoted heavily Oscar Romero. Quoted those quotes, many of them were from Oscar Romero. The Paulist priest did a film on the life of Oscar Romero, and there's a scene in there where the army has taken control of one of the chapels in one of the villages, and Oscar Romero goes into the chapel. It is now kind of being used as a barrack. He goes into the chapel because he wants to remove the Blessed Sacrament. And he walks in there, and they try and scare him. He goes up to the tabernacle, and he starts taking the hose to take him out, when one of the soldiers fires his machine gun to try and scare him. He falls to the ground, and they see that they don't scare him. He now starts picking up the hose that fell to the ground and putting them in the chalice. And so finally the soldiers just walk out of the church. And at that point, the poor of the village walk into the church. And he stands up and he sees the church getting filled with the poorest of the poor. And it's at that moment that he decides to begin to celebrate the Mass. And he gets the homily and he looks at them and he says to them, "You are the Christ on the cross today. You are the Christ on the cross today, my friends. Christ is on the cross in the faces of the poor. This is your time. Go out. Be steadfast. Go back to your schools. Understand that those schools, the education you're going to get at your Jesuit schools, are going to prepare you. They're going to give you the strength to be able to go out into the street. This is your time." I am so grateful to have been able to be with you this morning. It's a very special treat for me. I feel at home because the Jesuits have been my education as they are for you. And I join you in saying, vámonos a la calle, vámonos a la calle. Allí vamos a descubrir el rostro de Cristo. Vámonos a la calle. This is your time. This is your time. Thank you all very, very much.